the scenes. Max is behind the scenes answering questions, and I'm happy to chat about any that that you'd like to chat about. We've got a little bit more sort of content theory stuff to cover. As I keep talking about, we're sort of on a journey here to get to safe system assessments. We didn't drop you straight into a full everything you need to know about safe system assessments. We're getting there. You're picking up a lot along this journey. And we need to have a think about vulnerable road users, how we're going to assess things with vulnerable road users, and what sort of recommendations and considerations we might make there. So yeah, but just before I do that, I do want to have a little chat about this exposure, likelihood, severity thing, which I keep banging on about. And Victor did a really wonderful job there in categorizing. And categorizing is really one of the key things we need you to be clear on when you leave this course. It's one of the key competencies of an assessor is to know how to do that. And so the slide's gone a bit haywire there. Exposure, which is here, is really about the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, the number of cyclists, the number of motorcyclists, the AADTs. When we do have that separation, we can say we're influencing exposure, even though you've got the vehicles being bikes down here, and you've got the other vehicles, the motorized vehicles up here. You've still got the same volumes. There is literally no conflict point though, right? So that's how we can sort of justify that. And I think it becomes a little bit clearer when we start looking at the definitions in the Ost-Road Safe System Assessment Framework, which we haven't done yet. We haven't gone into the detail of that, but this will give you a little window into that. Road user exposure refers to which road users, in what numbers, for how long they are exposed to a potential crash. The measure, this is the key bit. The measures of exposure include AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, number of pedestrians walking on the road, crossing the road. That's the key. What other numbers? Now, there's a few things within safe system assessing that people have some trouble with getting their head around, and also a number of things that just weren't clarified within the Ost-Road Safe System Assessment Framework, or they weren't clarified because it sort of hadn't been thought through, because there hadn't been many safe system assessments done when that document was developed. And since then, there's been a lot of them done, and we've identified a handful of issues that really needed some clarity. And so we got together with some different industry representatives and talked through those issues and came up with some fact sheets and some interim sort of, this is the way we should do it as an industry until Ostroads sort of does a version 2 potentially of the Safe System Assessment Framework. And we've put those 6 into your memory stick and on Moodle, so you can have a look at them. But they cover off things which we've already identified can be a little bit an issue. So we've got scoring exposure at intersections is one there. One that'll be important for today is bike facilities. So at what point do you change from it being a likelihood reducing to an exposure reducing? So if you've got a bike lane, well, that's likelihood because people can leave their lane easily. Okay, what about if you do a small curb separator? Is that enough to make it go to exposure? And would say no, because it can be mounted quite easily. But then you sort of go, well, what distance or what sort of barrier system in between are we changing it from likelihood to exposure? There's a bit of that. bit of stuff on how to do assessments of long route projects and a few others, which we'll get to. But they're a resource there for you. So please have a look at them if you like at some point, but maybe when you're doing your assessment, it might become useful. So by the end of this module, we want to connect the One Network framework movement and place thinking with safe system thinking. We want to identify key characteristics for vulnerable road users. So that's our pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, and look at what aligns highly with safe system principles. And we want to categorize key risk factors for vulnerable road users into exposure, likelihood, and severity, of course. Very much what we want to do. So I'll probably jump straight into it. I've got a few little things for you to do, keep people involved. So they'll come up in a few minutes, and we will also have a stretch break shortly. But Max, is there anything that I need to deal with?
No, good to go. Ken, you can get stuck in.
All right. Well, let's look at the One Network framework movement in place at a very high level. Now, some of you are probably live and breathe this stuff, and will know far more about it than I do. But I'll explain sort of how we need to utilize this thinking, this strategic network planning thinking within a safe system assessment. Okay, so really the fundamental aspect sort of this thinking for safe system assessment is to start to look at that movement and place categorization of the road network. And this is the New Zealand way of doing this. There's different jurisdictions use slightly different names and slightly different ways of doing it, and sometimes call it link and place or other bits and pieces. It's all generally the same, and you know there are little unique differences here and there. But the key sort of thing to take out of it, if it's not something you're very familiar with, is that we think about roads and streets now not just as a corridor to move cars or a corridor to move freight. We think about it also as a place, potentially. So a place being an area to congregate, to trade, to interact, to socialize, for that community feel to it. And we also really acknowledge that movement is not about just moving cars and trucks, as I previously said, but it's about moving people and goods in whatever form of transport is the appropriate one. So some sort of fairly, basic 101 transport planning concepts here. But this place value, I think, has in the past been forgotten. And admittedly, roads and streets often developed as movement corridors. It's just the place value of them built up around them over time. You had the highway, and then that's where all the people were, had their, whatever it was, horses and things, but then it also came up, and then cars and lots of people going through there, and so lots of shops started to develop on there, and then it got this place value. So we've got place value on those axes, and we've got movement on the y-axis. So I'll just zoom into those a little bit more so we can see them a little bit clearer. Now, New Zealand did a very smart thing and separated out the rural environment to the urban environment, because most other jurisdictions sort of lump them all in together, and it gets a bit messy, I think, in terms of trying to do it all on one axis. But we're going to focus on the urban one just for our examples, but the same principles apply for for the rural context. But you can see here you've got, on the x-axis, we've got our place sort of value. Up here, your P1 is a really high place value. And over here, your M1 is a really high movement function. Like, it's all about moving people and goods through there. And you can see there that any bit of the network, the urban network, should be able to be sort of placed onto this. And it may change along a route as to where it sits, but it certainly sort of sits somewhere there. And so what we see, obviously, well, down here in New Zealand, it's been termed civic spaces are our sort of high place value places. It's not hardly any movement priority. It's not our priority. It's such a place. We see there the sort of city hubs having high place value, but also high movement requirements and function. Transit corridors being major areas for moving people and goods as quickly as we possibly can through there. And that could be your motorways, but it also could be your bike, your bike superhighway, your cycling, dedicated cycling areas. So don't think about it just as cars and trucks. And then you've sort of got local streets down here with sort of relatively low place value, low movement function. Don't tell the local residents that we give them low place value for their street. They don't tend to look too favorably on us when we tell them that. But as I said, the place value is a societal place value in terms of socializing, interacting, trade, congregating, these sorts of things. So what I'm going to do is just go through sort of a few of these categories, and what we'll do is we'll talk about how we can enhance the movement and place categorization through measures that get us better safe system alignment. And the reason you want to do this is not actually to do your assessment, because you're just assessing, we looked at that intersection with Victor. We just assess it as it is, right? Got a certain volume of vehicles, it's got certain infrastructure characteristics, got certain speeds, and we just sort of go, that's how we're going to score it in its alignment with safe system principles. But then the question or the next thing you do in a safe system assessment is start to make some recommendations or things that the project team could consider. And you can achieve better alignment with safe system principles in a raft of ways, but they're going to affect the road environment and the operation of that network in a significant way. If you know where it sits on this, it helps you to select things that are going to be more appropriate for that project or for that bit of the road network. And you can certainly get in an urban environment, you can get really high alignment with safe system principles often by blocking off any pedestrian or movement across the road, not letting cyclists on a bit of road and the like. And you can do that then at some decently higher speeds, but you've immediately sort of knocked out anything from there, because you've eroded the place value. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, right? I'm just saying that as long as there's a strategic planning objective to have this as a transit corridor or a high or there's recognition it's a low place value, then it's okay. Hope that sort of makes sense, but I'm happy to if I haven't explained it clearly enough, pop some comments in. We can go back to it. Or if there's something you really want to get clarified, or you know this intimately, and I've said something you slightly disagree with, pop your hand up, and you can even have a say. But yeah, let's start with our civic spaces. I popped this picture because of the sort of recent, pop-up tactical urbanism style things going on across New Zealand and Australia as well, around trying to activate areas that used to be a bit more of a movement corridor to make them more place orientated. But let's look at our civic spaces and say, let's do a little exercise here. This bit of road, this nice cartoon style road here, has been categorized in this civic space category. Okay, quite sort of squarely in the civic space category. Down here is a sort of P1 M5 style road or street. So what I'm going to ask you to do is have a little ponder and think about, what could you change in this road environment that would increase alignment with safe system principles, so it would improve road safety here, that would complement the P1 M5 categorization under the movement and place category. So, changes that are going to enhance that, make it more of a place to hang out, to, catch up with friends for a coffee and really, trade, interact, have a drink, enjoy the community atmosphere. So what can we do to change it? So it's currently a 40 km/h speed limit environment. You can see it's quite vehicles and buses and pedestrians and cyclists. So no limitations like we had that other time in terms of budgets or anything like that. But the only thing I will ask you to do is tell me also, are you impacting exposure, likelihood, and severity with your proposed changes? So just put an E or an S or an L, because I love exposure, likelihood, and severity categorization. It keeps me happy. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that and jot a few ideas down. Okay, I'm seeing some wonderful answers coming in there, and it's nice. Most people are putting them out to everybody, so everybody can have a see it, what others are thinking. I'll give you another minute, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about some of these. Okay. Well, I'm just loving this. This is a good group. This group's really starting to get their head around the exposure, likelihood, and severity, but they also coming up and have been from the start with really good thinking around road safety. But
I dare say, Ken, there's a few placemakers in this group because we've got some wonderful suggestions coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Max, what I usually do here is anybody who had said early, the first few people to say ban cars from the area can have a prize, because I like that as always just a first starting point for once you've categorized it in that civic space category up high in the P1s. I mean, we're not trying to move people and goods through here at all. Well, maybe a very tiny amount. Can we just create a pedestrian only area or a cycle only area? So chuck out a few prizes there at will, Max. What else are we seeing here? Sorry, I should say with that, of course, you influence the exposure. So if you block off cars, you've got to have less cars through there, or you might even have no cars through there. And it's going to be less exposure to crashes. Any others jump out at you, Max, or do you want me to just sort of whip through a few?
I love the idea of widening of the footpaths. That seems to come out quite often. So perhaps taking the parking lane.
Sorry, say that again. It's sort of missed it at the start.
Oh, sorry about that. Widening the footpath, perhaps taking the parking lane and making that more pedestrian area there.
Yeah, so that's a really, really good one. And I do want to just briefly mention something on that. So if we widen the footpath, we obviously have many advantages in an area like this, where we have less people walking on the road, we have a shorter crossing distance, and we have a narrower road width, so vehicles may be going slower depending on how it's sort of designed and what's done with it there. There is a temptation to categorize that as some way in exposure. Now, it could be an alteration in exposure if we reduce the number of vehicles that are going through there along with that somehow. The one that was never quite clear was if we have reduced crossing distance, so we put that out there and put that out to there. We've got this shorter crossing distance for a pedestrian. So they're, in theory, exposed by time to crashes less. So you might think you want to put that in exposure, but actually after many safe system assessments, it was sort of decided that that's actually a likelihood factor in the way we think about a safe system assessment. Now, it's probably one where the Austroads safe system assessment framework isn't too clear, and there's a few things that might lead you to want to put that into exposure. But I just stress that the way industry is doing that at the moment, that is a likelihood factor in terms of the distance to cross. Exposure will still just be the number of cars that are going through and trucks, because assuming that we have the same pedestrian numbers crossing, and the severity will be all about the speed. So I hope that clarifies that particular one. It's an excellent idea. It's going to get you better alignment with safe system principles. It's going to enhance the place of the area. So lots of ticks all around there, just how to categorize it. Anything else pop out to you there, Max? that was different?
Not to mention to speed zones, 40 kilometre per hour is too high for this environment if we're looking to create a higher place value here. So I saw 30s, I saw 20s, and I saw someone bold enough to go a 10 kilometre shared zone.
Right. Yes. Well, definitely. Like I love the fact people are questioning that. Now, if we've done that first question of can we just not let the cars in there, then you sort of graduate it up, don't you? You then might move into the shared zone style area, and those and many of you will know a shared zone being an area that pedestrians have priority over cars for the full length of it. It is more of a place sort of feel to it than the look of a road or a street, and that's part of the sort of design guidance for shared zones is pretty much don't make it look like a road, make it look like anything but a road, because it's cars and trucks are the odd ones out. They should not, they should feel like they're entering the pedestrian's territory. So that has a lot of place value to it. By its nature, with the low speeds and the like, you get a high alignment with safe system principles in reduced likelihood and severity of crashes. So that's a really good sort of next one to look at. And then exactly as we saw there, as you are requiring more of a movement function through this, you start to sort of add features that help the vehicles move through there quicker. Unless it's been sort of, well, actually, if it's been categorized as that cycle, it's a cycleway, you'll treat it slightly differently. You're still trying to now promote the ability for cyclists to start moving through there quicker as that movement function raises. But definitely agree that 40 kilometers, it's going to erode the place value of it just due to the speed of the vehicles. And it's really just a road then trying to pretend to have a nice place for people. You really want to start bringing those speeds down in these areas. One that popped out there that was interesting to see was one-way traffic, and that's always an interesting one to understand. Is that going to influence exposure likelihood or severity in a safe system assessment? So if we one-way this, it may significantly alter the volume of traffic. In a safe system assessment, what I tend to always do is say, I'm not going to change my exposure scores until I'm given some traffic modeling or somebody tells me to do that. I'm not just going to, lick my finger and go, I reckon it'll go down to 2,000 vehicles a day or 200 vehicles a day, right? I'm waiting for somebody who's done some analysis to tell me that. And it's not really the role of the safe system assessor to do the traffic modeling and analyze this and do predictions on number of pedestrians that might enter an area. So I'll always just go with a like for like. And if you one-way this, my assumption, without anybody telling me any different, would just be to say, well, we're going to one-way this, but we're also going to one-way the parallel one the other way. So it's just going to cover sort of circulating. So I'm going to say the traffic volume is the same. But if you get told, differently, you then can assess differently. But what you do with one-weighing this is you probably reduce the likelihood of crashes a bit. It's an easier crossing maneuver. It's a bit of an easier entering out of side roads and those sort of things. One way to look. Probably wouldn't alter the severity of crashes. Maybe severity for passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes could be down a little bit, even though it'd be fairly low already. But still, your pedestrian and your cyclist crashes are going to be pretty much the same severity. So you wouldn't be altering those. You might get a little bit of likelihood improvement by one-weighing it. Anything else different come out there, Max?
Not to mention to the raised crossing points as well, which always gets big ticks. And I love the idea if we're creating place enhancing place, that street beautification process, lots of landscaping, lots of greenery, places that you actually want to stay. Currently, I'd be walking through that area. It's not somewhere I'd just sit and, enjoy looking at traffic. So if you do have those place-making treatments, it creates a lot more street appeal and a lot more ability to actually stay and dwell there and enjoy the time there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the interesting one is that idea of crossing points. And I've gone back a slide, obviously. The reason I have is that for me, crossing points, you're moving up your movement. And it's really around movement of, generally around movement of cars, as I say, it could be around movement of cyclists, but you started to now shift up here, because think about that, like you're now saying to pedestrians and those who are congregating and the like, that's a road, you only cross over there, or you only cross over there, that's a road, that's for movement, right? So by its nature, crossing points erode place. I'm not saying they're a bad thing, but just be aware that by doing that, we're eroding place value. So let's have a look here at, again, some artistic impressions, and you always can pick technical issues with any artistic impression, of course, so we won't do that, but we'll just look at the general concept. And here you see sort of the one-way shared street style thinking. You wouldn't actually need that crossing point there if it was an actual shared zone, which is a legal definition of that. But you can immediately see, I mean, straight away, this is a better place to hang out, isn't it? Like, you would, way better, right? And we can very clearly see lower speeds, lower crossing, shorter crossing distances. It's all starting to be better aligned with safe system principles. So it's really nice stuff. As you, they'll still be able to get some movement through here. But as that movement requirement grows, you sort of start to then integrate a few more movement style features in there. And this is where, your real crossing points come in, separating out then the road users. So, your bikeways for movement, public transport ways, and maybe car ways for movement. But even still, you're doing those at a very low, at a low speed. And it's sort of around your 30 kilometers per hour is definitely maxing out your areas where you have this high place value and low lowish movement requirements.
Sorry to interrupt, Ken. Just got a...
Yeah, no, wonderful stuff. Well done, everybody. What a good team. Okay.
Oops, sorry, Ken.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Yep. Just got a really good question from James there regarding if you were closing the street or making significant transformational changes in the streets, you're potentially pushing issues elsewhere. So you might be changing exposure or likelihood or severity scores elsewhere on the network. So should your assessment, your safe system assessment, focus on those other areas, or are you just confined to your section that you're looking at that particular street? Thought it was a good question worth remarking on. And James, I might give you out a prize for that thought provoker.
Yes, so James, obviously a person who takes the blinkers off and looks holistically at impacts, which is a really, really great thing to do. It's not well sort of defined, and it's a discussion you have with your client in terms of the scope of the assessment and what they're doing. So in a lot of safe system assessments, there is not something as fundamental as that happening. So you're really playing with what's currently there, and it doesn't sort of have major implications on other areas. But you're right, absolutely. Sometimes we do see that, and it can be things where we're fully controlling right turns, or we're changing intersection forms. Things can have alterations and push more people to other areas. So what you really do is you're certainly going to analyze your own one, and you could get better alignment with safe system principles by, reducing the volume of vehicles through there, but they will have gone somewhere else. So what you would do in the safe system assessment is maybe, you'd have that conversation with your client, start saying, do you know where they're going, and do you want me to have a look at that one as well, that intersection as well, which is probably going to go up in volume, and are you doing any treatments there? But if they say no, we've done the modelling and it's all good, or we're happy with it, or the like, then that's all you're going to do. You may acknowledge it in some of your points to say the assessor feels that this may move a lot of traffic to the next intersection down, and the recommendation is to consider some treatments to reduce risk there. But you don't necessarily do the formal assessment then on that intersection as well. That would be a negotiation with your client. So the hope is that you sort of maybe shifting to a safer intersection, or an intersection that is pretty good. But yeah, so I hope that sort of clarifies it in a very murky way. No, I hope it's not murky, but there is not a defined answer that, yes, you have to look at everything that this project possibly impacts, because you certainly might get some big projects that have network-wide impacts, and you can't then sort of, where would you stop is the question. Any other points there, Max?
No, all good. I'll just respond to Chris at the moment. I just on that point as well from James, I just thought I'd share a little anecdote, but just in one of the safe system assessments that we worked on, we were defined an area and they were doing some fairly significant transformational changes. And we did notice that that's basically going to push traffic to another part of the network at a particular intersection that was perhaps not designed to cater for that increased load. And as part of our safe system assessment, we actually included a recommendation to do a separate assessment altogether to see what that would actually look like, because it wasn't within our current scope to look at that future demand and how that will look like. However, we do think that would be worth considering as part of this current project. So it's something that we included as a recommendation.
Yeah, no, that's good. And certainly other safe system assessments of, say, town bypasses or something, you would often do the assessment of your existing conditions, which is going through town, and then your future would be having all these vehicles going on the bypass, but you still would have some going through the town. So you then end up with a couple of assessment sort of comparisons. You'd have township before and after in terms of impact, and then you'd have the new facility after. And that's been good often for some townships where you might drop the traffic volume significantly, but the project team hasn't particularly considered what that redundant-ish road would operate like, just assuming, and it's often a highway standard road, so it's not bad, but you might have the opportunity now to significantly alter its movement and place categorization to more of a place, and then really attack it, because in that process you're bringing the traffic volume way down. It's not required to be that movement function, and that's your opportunity to pounce as they're cutting a ribbon on a new bypass. The speeds can be blanketed down, and all these things can happen on the old three-way. And your safe system assessment can help through that process. Okay. Right. We won't do this one as a group. We'll do the next one as a group, and we'll also utilize the next category exercise for you to have a stretch and fill your coffee up. So local streets, as I mentioned, sort of generally lower place value, lower movement function, and here's the artistic impression. It's quite high volume for some of this, but the same sort of principles really apply, don't it? When we've got low requirements there for both, but the protection of vulnerable road users becomes a very important characteristic. Little sort of rule of old rule of transport planning. Design for the road user that expends the most amount of their own energy in these environments, and that's your pedestrians and your cyclists. But because we don't have the requirements, it gives us the ability to slow speeds down, and then you can even enhance place value just by the sheer nature of it. But slowing speeds through there is really going to be a critically important aspect of the better alignment with safe system principles. By its nature, will probably generate more place value. Okay, let's get into some really tough categories now. Now, you get a lot of good community support for those other categories, because especially civic spaces and the like. Let's go to city hubs. High place value, but high movement function as well. Okay, challenging. So let's take this hypothetical, this cartoony example. We'll have a look at what can we do, same exercise, what can we do to alter this road environment, acknowledging that it's been categorized now as city hub. It's aspiring to have that high place value and high movement function. It's currently probably not performing in its place value, and it's performing to a degree in its movement function. It's 70 km/h speed zone there. You can see it's got a pedestrian overpass. It's got some pedestrian fencing there and over there and down the middle. Lots of lanes of traffic. All right, we're trying to now really make it much higher place value. We want high place, high movement, and we want high alignment with safe system principles. I'm going to give you all 5 minutes now, because you're going to have a stretch, fill up your water or your coffee or whatever you're having, and then jot a few ideas down. And of course, we want to see exposure, likelihood, and/or severity as to how you're doing this. Okay, Max, you're all right with that? Having a 4 or 5 minute break?
Absolutely. Enjoy your stretch, everyone.
Yeah, let's give it 4 minutes from now. All right, Max, I been reading through lots of these as they come in, and I'll tell you what, you got to this group gets an A+ in understanding movement and place and the One Network framework. I'll tell you what, it's
Very switched on.
yeah, it's excellent, and generally doing pretty well at the exposure, likelihood, and severity as well, which is really pleasing to see, because that's our real connection here. Well, in one way, and then making sure we come up with good recommendations that are helpful to the project. So I'll talk to a couple of them, Max. You just have a read through as I'm going and make sure I any that are a bit out of the ones that I talk about that are mentioned. Okay, the first thing I liked to see was, well, lots of stuff I like to see here. There was discussion about this pedestrian overpass, and some people sort of seem to have rightly noted that the pedestrian overpass is going to bring down the place value of this area. Again, it's that sort of separation. It makes it a very hard, clunky, way to cross, even if you do it with ramps and the like. So generally, what we sort of say is that from a safe system assessment perspective, yes, you're going to get a lower exposure number of pedestrians. Less pedestrians will be at the level exposed to crashes with vehicles. Also, you've got to consider that not all of them are going to use it as well. So you've probably got quite a residual risk there anyway. But it really does degrade the place value. So it would be for more movement corridors than this one, just because you're trying to make higher place value. So yeah, I think getting rid of that would be a reasonable thing to look at. Now, by getting rid of it, it does come with then the expectation of lower speeds through here, because to get a higher line with safe system principles, with pedestrians continuing across and now at grade, we're going to have those speeds down at crossing points to lower speeds. So the other one which came nicely in there was some people thinking about creating cycle facilities, shared path style facilities, utilizing some of the traffic lane, because remember, our movement isn't about just pumping as many of those cars and trucks through there. It's just getting people and goods through there. And if the mode shift could happen into those other modes, that would be great. And you do get some better place feel out of those sort of facilities rather than the cars as well. So that's all going to contribute nicely there. Now, that shared path facility is one where you go, is that exposure, likelihood, or severity? Well, it depends. It depends how it's separated. If it's separated by just a bit of sort of back-to-back curbing or something like that, something small like this, I would still probably put that in likelihood. It would reduce the likelihood significantly, but a vehicle, maybe somebody in here texting or drops their coffee in their lap or something, can sort of jump into a shared path facility. It's very low likelihood it's going to happen, and lots of things helping there, but it's still sort of there as a possibility. If this was much wider, I'd start to look at potentially saying, okay, now we're not exposed to it. There's not a defined line like a clear zone calculation or something like that. It's not there. You need to make a bit of judgment on it. If we had a barrier system or something that separated, that would be good. But that would start to be a challenge to some of the place feel of the area if you were starting to put up big barriers to separate. So there's a couple of the things that were mentioned in there. Some people don't like concrete pillars in 70 km/h environments. I too don't like that close to the road, and certainly as the 70 is way too high to keep the place value. So that will be certainly coming down, and if we're removing the overpass. Lots of sort of support for other measures to provide more place feel, like landscaping and trees and the like. How does that, influence exposure or likelihood or severity? Well, we would look at it, is it going to alter the speed of vehicles through there? Is it going to alter the number of vehicles through there? So it might alter the speed if it sort of closes and narrows the environment, might alter that a little bit. But in general, it's sort of probably something that's away from any of the influences on exposure, likelihood and severity, and more just something that's enhancing place. You always do need to consider if it's introducing road safety risk. So really, we can have wonderfully high line safe system areas with lots of trees and shrubs and plantings and all wonderful things, and they can perform really well. Speeds often have to be quite low to ensure that we're not having hazards for vehicle occupants, but that sort of goes hand in hand with creating a nice place anyway. Signalising crossing points to reduce the likelihood of crashes, absolutely. So we are in these environments, as in order to keep that movement up, we're probably going to have some signalised crossing points for pedestrians and have cycleways and vehicle lanes that will stop at those times. It's good to also ensure that at those conflict points, we're trying to keep speeds down within tolerable levels for the different crash types we're thinking about. Max, any other ones you wanted to?
I've seen mention to prioritising public transport options within this area, so perhaps dedicated bus lanes, less lanes just for general traffic, and that might actually have that mode shift effect as well.
Yeah, that's right. And then from that safe system alignment perspective, a mode shift is changes the volume of vehicles that are there, which changes the exposure to crashes. So that's sort of where your safe system benefit comes. Of course, many other wider benefits, but we're not sort of including them in a safe system assessment, because safe system assessments are focused on solely that road safety, safe system alignment. And we're really going through the whole movement of place thinking in order to be able to come up with good recommendations and good help to the project. And I saw similar in terms of things like cordoning off areas, tolling and the like, to try to influence the exposure of the exposure with the number of passenger vehicles going through an area like this. So that's really great stuff. Anything else stand out there, Max, that you want to?
We had some mention just regarding trees, and I suppose it's a common issue in this space, landscaping arrangements, and whether that's going to create additional risks with sighting, pedestrians that may be crossing or things like that. And perhaps that detail might get picked up at later stages of these types of projects, in detailed design audits, road safety audits and the like, but certainly something worth considering at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're utilising some pretty clear-cut examples intentionally in a training course to try to say, it goes very, it can be very black and white, but it can be very tough also, where we're having things that will enhance the place value of an area, but the speeds are still very high. And we see trees being planted, and that's becoming very popular. We are sort of introducing hazards in those environments. So where well, we need to think about the road safety implications of this. But I always say that, I mean, we can go hand in hand here with getting wins all around usually. Even on high-speed roads, we can often see continuous barrier systems and planting appropriately set back being better safety outcomes than sort of clearing large swathes of land. So, you know, you've got big wins there. And areas like this, you by planting them and landscaping them and making them more livable and areas people want to hang out and the like, our ability to blanket speeds down significantly just sort of presents itself. So we can get wins all around here. And I think I've mentioned that in the first module, that, you know, riding the coattails of the placemaking or the livable cities and getting our safe system alignment up through that, to me is brilliant. You know, we're just there to support that. You know, wonderful placemaking.
Just had a question. Oh, sorry, Ken.
That's all right.
I just had a question from Malcolm that was just addressed to us, so just Max and Ken, and I just wanted to share with the group because I thought it was fairly relevant. And the question was just regarding if the exposure relates to the number of people in vehicles as well. So say, for instance, you're looking at buses or, you know, just vehicles that may have lots of different occupants. Do you take that into consideration with the exposure? Because that's obviously a different number of people involved in a potential collision as opposed to just passenger vehicles. And yes, my response to that is, in short, no, you wouldn't consider that. It is the exposure, just the number of vehicles passing through that assessment area. It's not quite calibrated to that detail regarding the type of vehicle or how many occupants they can fit in. It is averaged out in that sense. So it's a very poignant question I wanted to share. Yeah.
No, and to a degree, it's similar to the way you think about a crash reduction study or a black spot investigation, or you know, things. We think about the crashes presenting risk in an area rather than the number of people. Now, the number of people is obviously our ultimate goal, is to make that zero, or, you know, to significantly reduce that by, but you know, if a bus full of people was to run off the road at a certain location, we don't count that as 25, you know, if there are 25 people on, we don't count that as 25 sort of crashes, because it's the one incident there. And so we're looking, if we're doing it in that reactive sense, we're looking for patterns of incidents. Anyway, that's Max's answer was great. I probably didn't even need to elaborate. All right, that's. I mean, I really feel this group's got their head around this this beautifully, and proven and shown that you can understand that we can achieve high safe system alignment in multiple ways. It's going to have an impact on the functioning from a strategic perspective of that road or street, and will change its categorization potentially, and just be aware of that, and work with your project teams that you're doing the assessments for to understand what their objectives are, what their strategic objectives are, and run with it. Like this one, for example, we could change it, yep, absolutely, to something like this, which has still got pretty good movement function. I'm going to just get rid of my red scribbles. It's got pretty good movement function there. It's still got lots of, you know, people getting through there and goods getting through there, and different modes. It's got, you know, much more place value. You can see it's going to be significantly safer, better aligned with safe system principles. It's got slowing down at some particular, you know, conflict points. I'd probably have just raised the whole intersection as well, but got some side road raising and other things. But yeah, you can see influencing definitely the likelihood and severity of crashes are down. The exposure probably down as well, because they've done it looks like mode shift and magically got some cars to disappear. It all looks easy when it's a cartoon, doesn't it? But there's some good examples around New Zealand of things that are progressing that way, and we don't probably notice them as in our face as when you see it like that, cartoon before and after or the like. But additions of cycleways here in Christchurch and these sorts of things are really, they are enhancing place value. They're retaining critical movement functions, and we're seeing better sort of outcomes all around. And you see different ways to then treat intersections and the like. Before I just briefly talk about urban connectors, I will say that if I do get anything in a safe system assessment or even another project that sits up in this corner, first thing I'm trying to do is ask them lots and lots of questions to say, can we move it? Can we get it either to go there or down there? That's going to really help. It just helps. It's easier when it's not everything's a priority, but so many roads are. It's an important movement corridor. It's our high street as well. It's where all the bars and the pubs and the cafes and everything are. And it's also, it's the strategic cycling corridor. No, it's also the freight route. It's the public. Yep, it's the public transport route as well. And you're like, oh my God, it's got everything. So if you can convince them to try to give a strategic shift, that can help out. But let's talk about urban connectors. So maybe you have got them to say, actually, it's going to be an urban connector, and we're going to. This is where we're really seeing your more freedom as it goes down here to actually acknowledge you're not trying to make this amazing place to hang out and trade and socialize. So you can do things like your pedestrian overpasses, fencing, fencing off pedestrians, making it so it's definitely not areas to hang out. You may still be doing, depending on which modes you're prioritizing through here, you may be doing dedicated cycleways as well. But again, you can sort of separate them off with barrier systems or the likes, so they're not exposed, but they get their clean, fast run through. As I mentioned earlier, it could be just a cycleway in its own right. And then same sort of principles apply. You don't want to make it an area where people are crossing, hanging out, and you're trying to separate those. So you can see there that you're creating an environment that will be highly aligned with safe system principles, but it's doing it by exposure, minimizing, eliminating exposure to crashes, and likelihood. The severity, if somebody was to get in there, would probably be higher because your speeds are going to be higher. But you do very much want to think about that at the conflict points and managing speeds within those energies we know are within those tolerable sort of envelopes, 50 kilometre per hour passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle at these signalised intersections or the like, if you've got these corridors crossing each other. And if pedestrians are having to cross a grade, we still do want to try to get those speeds lower if we possibly can. So a little bit of a chat about pedestrians and cyclists, and then finishing it off with motorcyclists and probably giving you 5 or 10 minutes or 5 minutes probably to do the quiz, and it'll set us up beautifully for Friday's session where we'll give you your safe system assessment to do. Cyclists and pedestrians, certainly the most vulnerable road users. We know sort of severe injury risks, for 10% around that 20 kilometre per hour mark, and sort of highly likely to be death around the 50. And that 30 kilometres is often bandied about as a real point where things go really bad really quick after that. Young and old, even more vulnerable, obviously. And that may slightly factor into your safe system assessment if you do notice there's a lot of old people in the area or crossing or the like, or young people as well, schools and the like. So we ideally want to manage those speeds to around that 20 km/h mark, where the pedestrians are crossing and we're getting that conflict point. The separated treatments we talked about are really proving to be working fairly well. There's lots of details in how to design them to get the best out of it and the like. But most of the time, I'm categorizing these as a reduction in the likelihood of crashes for a number of reasons. One being that they often have to cross roads anyway. So there's our sort of conflict. So that's where it's back to likelihood, not exposure. And lots of emergence of pretty exciting ways to look at reducing the likelihood of crashes and the severity of crashes, and cater for these different modes, such as things like the protected roundabouts. There's a nice artistic impression. We should put in some photos of the real ones, but this is the point's not to get into how to design a roundabout with bike and pedestrian facilities around it. It's more just to sort of start continuing to think about, are we addressing likelihood and severity, and if possible, exposure as well. And same principles apply as you get bigger. Can we do things to reduce likelihood, to reduce severity? I like this little mock-up example of a way to sort of separate a cyclist through an area with some priority potentially. And then if they have to cross the main highway, they have some staggered crossing. So likelihood is reduced here, maybe severity a little bit because vehicles may have slowed down there, but predominantly likelihood there. But here you're going to have severity reductions as well. And a little adaptation on the a Dutch diagram, the sort of idea that you can share lanes up to maybe 30 kilometers an hour, maybe lower than that, using these style symbols. What's prize for the person who tells me what that symbol is called? Oh, geez, Peter was on it quick, wasn't he, mate?
Well done, Peter.
It's a sharrow.
Yep, sharrow.
It's a mashing of the words shared and arrow together, I think. Not chevron, as I originally, many years ago, thought it was chevron and something arrow. But no, just indicating where cyclists and vehicles would share the same road space. And really there you're going with low speeds, so severity will be low, likelihood will be low because of the low speeds, a bit lower, but there's no space to separate. Then you're moving into some sort of separation, and this is where you're really reducing the likelihood of crashes. And then up here past that sort of 70 as a rule of thumb is where we just get them so far away that we're changing the exposure to crashes. A little chat about pedestrians, and here's a bit of lovely New Zealand network. And the fact for me is that I feel if we've got enough pedestrians to give pedestrians priority, we also have enough pedestrians to ensure that vehicle speeds are well within tolerable levels. So I don't like an at-grade crossing at all. I mean, a lot of bad evaluations, as in the evaluation methodology was good, but the outcomes were not good for the safety impact of a zebra crossing, like an at-grade pedestrian crossing. As soon as you raise it like this to a raised pedestrian crossing, I'd call it a wombat crossing, but a raised pedestrian crossing, it's outstanding in terms of its road safety characteristics. Now, as I understand, New Zealand doesn't use red anymore. Am I right there? I think it's something to do with the visually impaired find it hard to distinguish, but somebody will be able to correct me there. Yeah, so Malcolm's saying, yeah, trying to avoid red and the contrast. Yeah, thank you. That was my understanding as well. But the point being, it's all about raising to me. So we address the severity of crash, and that's really important. And somebody's just pointing out the tactiles only go halfway. I wonder why that is. Well spotted. Give them a prize too. Eagle eye. Oh, somebody's saying it's the lamp pole. Okay, so interesting. We'll look at a different one. But yes, so raising is wonderful. It's just significantly better in terms of reduction in severity. The likelihood of crash is down as well because it's slower speeds of vehicles. You also get higher, the pedestrians are crossing at a better eye height. Marginally, you get improvement there, but that lowering speed is wonderful. I pop this up because I think it's quite interesting to for me in the sense that I feel we have known for a long time how to get really well aligned safe system areas for pedestrians, and this is an example, I suppose. But it's the fact that for a couple of weeks there was a couple of workers working in the island in here on electrical works and things. And so this is in Adelaide, back quite a while back. So a 25 km/h speed zone goes in place for roadworks. So Adelaide uses, South Australia uses a 25 km/h work zone speed limit, which is interesting. Anyway, so the workers are there, 25 km/h, and barriers as well, because they're working close to the road, and they work for their couple of weeks, and then they finish and then pack everything up. Barriers go away, speed limit goes back to 60 km/h. It's not that 60 these days, but back then it was. And we have like 3,000 pedestrians a day standing in the sort of exact location that the workers were. And the thing is that we just look at it completely differently. We go, the worker's vulnerable, road user, and death or serious injury to them is absolutely unacceptable. We will not let that happen. Pedestrian, no, they can look after themselves. I don't know what the thinking is, or maybe people often say, well, the workers are concentrating on their work, not the traffic. Pedestrians are concentrating on their phone, or they're intoxicated, or there's so many other things going on. But just, I think, if you ever need to do that elevator pitch to somebody, what is the safe system? They say, what's a safe system? And you've got to give them that quick pitch. Just say, workplace health and safety. If we could afford that level of safety to the entire traveling public, we would be very close to our safe system alignment, and just have the same philosophy of safety for everybody, rather than just, well, no, you've been paid to do this, right? You can be safe. You pay? No, you're not. Okay. Anyway, lots of exciting stuff for pedestrians. Slowing vehicles, obviously, is going to be so critical to ensuring our pedestrians get high safe system alignment in any areas that they're crossing at grade or in that vicinity. And so we will see a lot of that raised staff, raised threshold treatments, addressing both likelihood and severity, and general speed limit reductions. This is default speed limits dropping from 60 to 50, and you can see step changes in pedestrian casualties. But I'm not going to spend long on that, because I want to briefly talk about motorcycles. And as I said, they give you hopefully about 5 minutes to finish your quizzes and finish off your assignment if you need it. But I'll pause and see if Max has got any questions.
There is a question come in just regarding people with low vision and blind and They may benefit from having if they're at signals and actually having that audio reference that they can cross the road, compared to if they were at like a raised crossing point or the like. I was just responding to that at the moment. Happy for you to expand on that. I was just going to suggest that if you are closing any of those signalized intersections for, there is that, I suppose, high exposure of that community, perhaps also raising the pavement there as well. So then you've got the benefit of both the audio cue for people with low vision to cross the road safely, and also you're slowing vehicles within that area as well. So you're kind of getting both of those benefits.
Yeah, the ticking of the clicking of the signals can be beneficial, but yeah, I mean, I think sort of DDA compliance, or is a really important thing for us to think about. I think there's a huge bulk of road trauma happening across the board. A lot of intoxicated pedestrians being killed and seriously injured as well. They're a hugely dominant, overrepresented part of pedestrian trauma in New Zealand and Australia. And what you can sort of create environments that are generally good for everybody, and slowing the speeds of passenger vehicles in those pedestrian areas is so important. So you can get sort of win-wins all around. Okay. So motorcyclists, and I know a few of you are motorcyclists, and it's a very brief snapshot into motorcyclists, but I'll tell you now that motorcyclists have their own categories within a safe system assessment, as do cyclists, as do pedestrians, as do cars. Cars and trucks sort of often get lumped together, but you'll directly be assessing the safe system alignment for motorcyclists. I'll tell you from the get-go, it is very challenging. Motorcyclists, in most safe system assessments we do, come out with the highest scores, and high in a safe system assessment is bad. So they're furthest aligned from safe system principles in a lot of our safe system assessments, most of them. But a few little things to think about, and I've mentioned these to a lot of you already, I think, in different forums. But sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed for motorcyclists. So can the motorcyclist be seen, and can the motorcyclist see what's coming up? Is the surface appropriate? And are there good signs to guide, warn, inform? And what's the motorcyclist going to hit or be hit by in the crash? The S for strike there. And what are the speeds this is all going to happen? And when we look at those, I mean, likelihood is the sight, surface, signs. Strike is the severity, and speeds are a magical thing in road safety, influencing both the likelihood and the severity of crashes. Now, for a lot of time there, when we're thinking about severity for motorcyclists, we were really sort of just saying, well, we'll just say they're pedestrians, and because we don't have any better information. And then recently we've got a bit more detailed information here from 2019 study by one of my colleagues, or one of our colleagues, Max and I's colleagues, Johan Strandroth in Sweden, and here's a couple of others around. So these are the injury risk curves for motorcyclists that they produced, which is good. I mean, it shifts things up a bit from the saying that it's just a pedestrian going at really high speeds to saying it's actually, there is higher, we can go higher speeds with lesser injury, but it's still nowhere near what you get for a passenger vehicle. The motorcyclists are still very highly vulnerable, even with the helmet and the leathers and the like, still highly vulnerable to injury compared to a passenger vehicle. Okay, let's talk about these very briefly, just touch on them. So sight, we're talking about the likelihood of crashes, and when you're assessing, you want to be thinking about, what are things that might make it harder to see motorcyclists, at intersection, maybe things that block sight lines, so that tree there, you can see those motorcyclists hidden behind the tree there, signal controller boxes, small bits and pieces can block sight of the rider and the rider what they can see ahead. So if we can alter these sorts of things and think about them in a safe system assessment, reducing the likelihood of crash. The surface, obviously, so important, just because the riders lean as they're going around a curve or a corner, and small contact patches, and so the surface becomes this very critical aspect for the likelihood of crash for motorcyclists, far beyond any other road user in terms of surface. They're very much called the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface defects, are first to be killed or seriously injured. So when we're doing that safe system assessment and you're looking at that area, you will, if you see surface defects, you'll be putting more weight on the likelihood of crashes for motorcyclists than you would for other road users. Things like steel pit lids, and obviously if that's wet and becomes slippery, it's going to be an issue. So the likelihood of crash by that just being there has gone up for motorcyclists far, far more than any other vehicle. Cyclists won't find that good either, but certainly motorcyclists are going to struggle. So signs are a very effective way to communicate to riders and reduce the likelihood of crashes, warning, informing of what's coming up. I know New Zealand's now starting to utilise some of these warning signs to talk directly to motorcyclists about specific issues, and then just the general good signage, consistent signage, is all helps to reduce the likelihood of crashes for motorcyclists, and appears to be from some different studies more influential for motorcyclists. Motorcyclists are more attuned to some of the signage than some of the other road users. Don't forget to count your wallies, obviously. And of course, strike. Strike is now that motorcyclist is hitting objects. How bad is this going to be? And I gave you some crash curves. We've included motorcyclists in those coloured charts from module 1. But just to give you a little bit of a clue into what some of the forces that we're sort of dealing with. This is a crash with a motorcycle dummy at a barrier system. So it's the European motorcycle crash test barrier test. That's 60 kilometers an hour, 25-degree angle with a fairly standard dummy. I think they weld its thumbs and do some slight alterations to its neck, but essentially it's the same as a normal crash test dummy. And you shoot it at the post, and then you shoot it between the posts, and it's for unrun. But the first one you're going to see here is when the dummy hits the post, and at 60 kilometers per hour. Just want you to see the sort of violence of that impact. So there you go. And now with some underrun protection of one sort, we're redirecting the energy, absorbing some of the energy and redirecting it along the system. And you can see there's some cushioning, some absorption of energy, some redirection of energy. That's really important, redirection. So they're dissipating energy over time. And so we are able to start to work on the severity of crashes for motorcyclists with some of this thinking. It's very challenging. This is we're talking 60 kilometers per hour crashes here, but they are proving with the underarm protection to be within sort of tolerable levels. So we're seeing some good outcomes there. I'll just quickly sort of, have I got time? I just can't pass up talking about motorcyclists and wire rope safety barrier systems, because it's been, it's a topic that comes up so often and I think is misunderstood by a lot of people. Really, we have not across Australia and New Zealand seen major issues with motorcyclists and wire rope safety barrier systems for a number of reasons. First of all, take our touring routes, for example, motorcycle touring routes, nice windy routes, and plenty of those in New Zealand. They often have fairly tight curves, and we simply just cannot put a wire rope safety barrier system in there. So if we're looking down on a curve like that, and if we were to put a wire rope barrier system in that curve, there we go, put the wire rope in there, we'll anchor it down here and here, and we'll tension it up. Tension, 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 tension. What does it want to do? Of course, it wants to pop into the middle of the road, doesn't it? And the posts will start to bend, and you'll see it happening. So you don't use wire rope barrier systems on these windy routes. There's minimum curve radius 200 usually for wire rope systems. So you're not going to use them. So they're not out there in these particular areas of risk. They're used usually on long, relatively straight routes. And motorcyclists don't tend to fall asleep and drift off the road the same way passenger vehicles do. Okay. So the fact is that the barrier itself is not used in the areas of high risk for motorcyclists. Second one is that all the studies are showing that motorcyclists, if they were to collide with a wire rope, they'll hit it and they'll go over the top. They're not going to get sliced up by the wire. We've seen no evidence of that in the small number of crashes that have happened. So that wire is just a complete sort of myth of the cheese cutter thing. It's a myth. Where there is some, I suppose, merit and something we probably need to continue to think about, the posts themselves, half the riders seem to be sliding and they'd hit the base of a barrier system. If that barrier system happens to be a wire rope, we don't have particularly good ways to manage the energy or redirect the energy with a wire rope system. But if you sort of take it back to, there's a tiny chance, a minuscule chance that a motorcycle is going to hit a wire rope system, like compared to a W-beam system, off the charts. Chances of it being struck comparatively, and then motorcycles hitting barriers are about at 20% of motorcycle crashes. So you can sort of narrow this down, and it's a very, very tiny thing for motorcycles with wire rope safety barriers. And I just say that we can do so much in motorcycle safety, and we shouldn't get clouded by an issue like that, which is really a non-issue compared to other things. But the reality is, if you do have concerns about motorcycles, there's such wonderful, flexible W-beam systems with underrun protection available that you'd use that, of course. 1 to 10. But managing speed in any way you can, be it advisory speeds and consistency along a route, consistent advisory speeds, regulatory speed limits, and then different ways to reduce speed through vertical deflection, horizontal deflection, are all going to be beneficial in terms of the likelihood and severity of crashes. And we've got sort of wins all round. Okay, I think that's enough because what we're going to do next session is get into the real mechanics now, the meat of the assessment framework, and you'll just basically be told, right, here's what you're going to have to fill out and where, and you're going to have to use all of that knowledge of what would go in exposure, what would go likelihood, what would go severity, and what recommendations are good and not so good. But you're going to be primed to go out and do an assessment straight after that. Now, we'll introduce you to that on Friday. We'll give you your assignment, and you have a couple of weeks to do it. So you don't have to cancel your weekend plans. Max. Oh, I see lots. Oh, geez, I've got Victor's written us an essay on barriers.
It's a really good summary there. So thank you for sharing, Victor. Just to highlight your point there, Ken, less than 1% of motorcycle fatal injuries over the last 10 years have involved wire rope safety barrier. So although it's regularly reported and perhaps over-reported within the industry that we're in, it's not really as representative as a risk as we're actually seeing in terms of trauma. So something that is, a contentious issue, but there's certainly some other risks for motorcyclists out there.
Yeah. All right, that's good. Well, thank you for that. We did well there. We covered off just a light sort of touch on all road users, but really getting ourselves with the principles of exposure, likelihood, severity, understanding how to categorize those, what's good, what things work well, how do you make meaningful recommendations in the context of the One Network framework and movement in place. You're just primed and ready to jump into a full safe system assessment, I'll tell you what. But yeah, in your last few minutes here, I suggest you go and do your quiz for today. Max, there's a quiz.
That's correct. Quiz at the end of today. There's also a couple of videos that we've provided in Module 3 if you are interested in learning more about different intersection configurations to better protect vulnerable road users. Something I'm particularly interested in, so I'd recommend giving that a view perhaps later on today or whenever you get the chance. And that's about it until Friday.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, Max.
And remember to log in early to get more trivia questions. I'll try and make it a little bit easier this time.
That's good. That's good. Thanks. Catch ya.
Have a good day. See you.
Bye.